Welcome to Career Tools. Today's topic, presentations, movement. Here we go. Presentations regularly come in at least in our top 10 list about what people are most afraid of. Some folks are terrified.
Yeah.
And you and I, we've been to many presentations at client sites, and they are terrible.
Yeah, it's the Horseman Christmas rule, right? If you do it rarely and it's important to you, you're likely to underperform. It's simple as that.
Well, but luckily for us, for you and I, and for people listening particularly, with presentations, this is one of those cases where in the land of the blind, the one-eyed person rules. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to be better than, even just a little bit better than everyone else, and you are going to look good.
Yeah, and this cast is about moving around, how you handle your own movement in the room. We've already talked about voice and gestures, and so now we're talking about movement. We've got 6 points. I'm going to do my best to be brief, but this is a topic near and dear to my heart because most people get it really wrong. The first thing is we're going to talk about owning the room, and by that I mean taking away anything that's going to get in your way. You need to physically arrange the room in a way that helps you move around. Then we're going to repeat something that we've said before, which is you stand still when you're starting. When you talk to people about movement, people mistakenly believe that moving all the time is good, and that's false. There are times to move and times not to move. We're going to talk about using the whole space. We're also going to talk about the thing that everyone misses, and no one has time. But if you want to be great, it's not impossibly hard, but you've got to be willing to practice. Also, you've got to learn to move into the audience. This is something a lot of presenters don't do. And they create this idea that there's me versus them. Even if you're moving around, you still move around like you're caged. And the last one is, and this is the biggest mistake that people make when you tell them they're supposed to move around, is they pace back and forth. And there's a rule. And the rule is no pacing.
Good. Okay, now I want to ask you about, taking away anything that gets in your way. But before you get into that, just help me out a little bit and address the question that I think a lot of folks might have. How is movement different to gestures?
Oh, well, gestures are movements that you make with your hands, with your arms, with your body. But in general, when we're talking about movement, we're talking about upper body gestures. We're talking about upper body gestures. And it's somewhat irrespective of your feet. Generally, your feet are staying still when you're gesturing, though it doesn't have to be. Movement may involve gesturing, but generally when we're talking about moving, we're talking about your physical location in the room itself. Where are you saying things from? From the front, from the middle, from the back, from the left, from the right, at the podium, and not.
Okay.
So, yeah.
All right. So once you consider the fact that you're moving your feet, then taking away anything that's going to get in your way becomes somewhat obvious, right?
Yeah.
It's hard to move.
Look, when we, as an example, when we set up for a conference, hotels setting up as a subset of the bigger issue of presenting, we often have to ask the staff of the hotel to take away a table that they put at the front of the room. Sometimes they have chairs there for you to sit at. They don't know. I mean, people don't get this. Hotels are in the business of providing a room and renting it. They're not in the business of presenting. They don't know what good presenters do. The average presenter is bad, and so the average person who's presenting in a hotel is bad, and they want a podium, which is usually a bad idea. But even if we tell them not a podium, or not a half table, or a tabletop podium, there's a table up there, and often
sometimes quite large for the projector.
Yeah. And the point is, if you're going to be presenting, don't blame the hotel for the space that you've got. Move stuff. Okay, get rid of tables. If you're in a conference room and there's a podium, I mean, sometimes the podiums are wired right into the ground underneath, right into the floor underneath, but there are plenty of times where it's a movable podium. Get that thing the heck out of the way. We asked for a table for the projector, right? And they put the projector table, and they use a 6-foot by 4-foot table or a 3-foot table for the projector, as if the laptop is 55 pounds and has to be 30 feet away from the projector. You want the smallest possible table that your projector can be on that's still stable, because you want more room to move around. In fact, if we could eliminate the table entirely, we would, because it's just something to bump into. Now, in many cases, you've got to have a table for the projector to sit on, because the projector's not hanging from the ceiling or whatever. Although sometimes you can put it in the front row, unless the front row, of course, has a center aisle, in which case you rarely want a projector which is off center of the screen because it will be really hard to get the image to look good without messing people up. Okay, but literally for us, our setup for our projector to make it small is big enough only to have the projector. And if I could have our MacBook Air underneath it, I would. Okay. But guys, we don't want you thinking that we're just talking about hotels here. We're talking about conference rooms too. When you walk into that conference room, don't assume that the conference room setup has to be the way it is. Look, I'll tell you what, if I worked at a company, heck, when I was at USAA, I remember very clearly somebody says, well, you can't do anything in the conference room. Well, I just stayed late the night before and I moved a couple of things out in the hallway and people wondered what was going on. But when I presented, I didn't bump into the podium like everybody else did in a too small conference room. Okay. You can move things around, and too many people assume that it was there the way, when they got there, it was there. And so that's the way it should be. And it's not true.
Yeah, you can even.
If somebody tells you can't, well then okay, you can't. But unless there's somebody senior to you, don't believe them and move stuff the way you want to move it and get it all out of the way. Sorry, go ahead.
I said we've even stolen stuff from the Pope. So I mean, you can do.
Oh, that's right, in Germany. In Freising, Germany. That's right. We went into a room and the room wasn't ready. We were there at 6:00 in the morning in a Catholic diocese room that TI had hired us to do. And we moved things around, and there were pictures of the Pope having an audience in the room, and we were very touched. And we started moving tables, and they were very upset.
They were very unhappy.
They were very unhappy with us. I think we touched things.
That was the one time when I was thankful that my German wasn't that good, and I couldn't understand what they were saying.
Sorry, stupid American. Nothing we could do. Yeah. Look, you want as much contiguous free space as you can get, so that you can move without thinking about what you might bump into. Guys, the less space you have, the less you're going to naturally move. When you start presenting, you're going to be aware of the physical things that are in your way, and you'll stay away from them. And you could have a pretty good space. You could have a 10 by 10 or 10 by 15 space, but with a couple of things in it, suddenly now you've only got a 6 by 8 space, and now you might very well have a lot of energy, but in a 6 by 8 space, it may come across as you're a caged tiger, which is not good. The more open space you have, the more you'll move. The more you move, in the right way, of course, the more you're going to be perceived as knowledgeable and engaging the audience, believe it or not. As long as you're not pacing, as long as you're not walking in circles and so on. We know corporate offices, conference rooms can be small. It's hard to move things, but it's worth trying. If you followed our other guidance and career tools about developing relationships with people, including people, say, in facilities or whoever's responsible for the room, they'll help you. Okay? And if you have to do it yourself, it's worth the extra effort simply to eliminate one of the small obstacles. And if you can eliminate a small obstacle, as hard as it is to get your words right and to get your tone right and to get your persuasive points across, why wouldn't you? Particularly since you don't want to be messing with it during your presentation.
Good. Okay. So your second point is kind of interesting. Stand still when starting. Now we're talking about movement, and all of a sudden now you're telling me to stand still.
Look,
so what's all that about?
Yeah, this is a common misconception. The idea that, well, movement is good, so therefore more movement is good. No, there are times to move and times not to move. We said it before. We recommend, guys, you start any presentation in what we call the power position. That's usually in the front of the room and in the center of the room. And when you're in the power position, you are standing completely still. I was in Atlanta recently with a client, great client, Zaxby's, and there were 35 people in the room. I gave 3 presentations over the course of 2 days. And it was a fairly small room. We had 35 people crammed in there. And it was pretty loud in the room. The ceilings were pretty high. That's another thing people mess up about room size. They don't realize that the height of a ceiling makes an enormous difference in terms of how people feel inside a room. That said, I walked up to the front of the room. I had been introducing myself to people as they came in. Hello, how are you? I'm Mark. I'm the presenter, so on. Have a seat wherever you like. Take a name tent. And then I walked to the front of the room. Pretty loud, boisterous group, right? Restaurant franchisees, great people. And I walked to the front of the room about a minute before 8 o'clock when I was scheduled to start, and also 2 o'clock one afternoon. And I stood in the front of the room. I put my right hand inside my left hand in sort of I cupped my left hand and then put my right hand almost in a fist inside it. And I held my hands at waist height, and I stood looking at my clock, which was on top of the projector, maybe 5 feet in front of me. And I stood in the power position. We had a center aisle, and I stood maybe 1.5 feet in front of the front row right in what would have been the center of the center aisle, the center of the room. And I just stood there. And within 15 seconds of me standing there,
saying nothing,
the entire room went silent. And I still had 30 more seconds to go before the thing started. And I joked to somebody who I talked to earlier who knew about our podcast extensively. I said, we teach this too. It works every time. Stand here and the room will go quiet. Now look, we're not saying it'll go quiet in a room of 1,000, but if there's a single spotlight and you're on a stage and there's no podium to get people confused and you're standing in the spotlight looking out at the audience with your feet planted stock still, shoulder width apart, and you're looking at the audience and it's getting close to the time the meeting is supposed to start, you can quiet a crowd of 1,000. If you stand confidently there in an expectant fashion, not with your eyebrows up, just stand there still. And what you want, the reason we're doing this, we've talked about this before, and trust me guys, this has to do with the movement, okay? What you're doing is saying, I'm going to be in charge at the moment we start. And what's funny is people who are walking around on stage, and I'll talk more about that in a second, they think they're implying they're in charge. And in fact, just the opposite. They're suggesting they're really not ready. In fact, this is what I see most frequently. It's like so much of our stuff, it's counterintuitive if you've never done it. But once you do it one time, people are like, oh.
Yeah, I get it. Right?
Oh, I get it. Oh, it works. What's the famous line? You're not going to believe it. I tried what you suggested and it worked. Why wouldn't we believe it? This is what we do.
Before you continue, let me ask you a question, though, about standing still, because you also said in the past that having a lot of energy as a presenter is important.
Yeah.
And so, contrast, a lot of people will say, look, I'm moving around, I'm putting energy out there. I'm trying to fill the room with energy.
But not before you start. Well, what good is it to put energy into the room before it starts when usually the room has plenty of energy already, right? And something else, too. If you're the third presenter in a row, you can't be walking around while other people are presenting, right? You have to start somewhere. And what you do to start is you pause. You create a pause with your physical standing still, even if it's only 5 seconds, even if it's only 3 seconds for those of you who think 5 seconds is forever. When you pause, then after that, when there's energy, they know it's energy that you're injecting into the room. If you're walking around before and a crowd is milling and sitting down and there's a lot of ambient noise, and then you start talking as a way of saying, I'm gonna react to that. What happens when a speaker let's say you're walking around at the front of the room, you're getting your room ready, which by the way, what does it say when a speaker 30 seconds before he starts or she starts is getting the room ready?
Not prepared.
They're not prepared, right? Okay. What happens in the room? Let's think about this, guys. What happens in the room when you're walking around trying to show a lot of energy before things are starting? There's some ambient noise. People are getting ready to sit down. Maybe some people are sitting down. Maybe there's notebooks. They're opening their notebooks up. They're getting ready to take notes, whatever it might be. What happens the moment the speaker starts speaking to the audience? What does the audience do?
They're startled. Well,
what do? They stop making noise. Think about it now.
Slowly, sometimes.
Ooh, I don't know.
Yeah, you think okay.
No, within 5 seconds, everybody's quiet. If you're the one that's supposed to be speaking, if it's time for you to start, and you start speaking at the appropriate time, and do we need to have a discussion here about timeliness? Obviously not. If you start late as a presenter, don't come crying to me about your problems. Your problems all start there with starting late, okay? What happens is the room goes quiet. So, you've been presenting energy, the audience has energy, and at the moment you want a great start, you deflate the entire audience by talking, and they're not ready for it. On the other hand, if you pause, if you go to the power position and you wait, everybody quiets of their own accord. They're not surprised or, as you said, startled at all. And for a moment, there's no energy in the room. And they acquiesce. They agree to take all the energy out of the room for a moment other than expectations. And then you start. And now it's all you. Whereas before, the you was, I'm going to quiet you down by starting to talk. In other words, you're forcing them to stop.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Whereas when you get quiet and you stand there expectantly, they naturally quiet themselves down. Everybody turns to you. And really the energy in the room is expectancy toward you. I'll tell you, it's amazing to me the number of people who walk around. They literally walk around thinking that they're showing energy. And look, they're trying to show that they're so natural and so comfortable, they can just start talking as they're walking around. But, as you said, it appears as if they're not ready. Now,
I think,
I got to tell you something else. I'll tell you something else.
No. Go ahead.
Okay, so I was going to win that battle, I promise you. Here's what people have told me. Actually, Mark, I was ready. I'm just moving around to give the audience energy. I said, 2 minutes before your presentation, the audience has all its energy, all the energy it needs. Okay? There's ambient noise in the room, it's fine. Okay? If you're ready, but you're moving around as if you're not, I can promise you, remember, great presentations are always about the audience. They think you're not ready. I don't care if you are ready. Why are you doing something that's essentially not true to what if you're ready, why are you moving around as if you're not ready? Because that's what the audience thinks. Don't send a message different than what you want. Be ready. In fact, we recommend being ready a half an hour in advance.
Well, I think another key point, though, is even if you think you're ready, the audience doesn't perceive you are, so therefore you're not. But even if you think you're ready, the audience isn't ready, right? How many times does a speaker start to talk, and then the room settles down, right?
Right.
But half the people didn't hear the first couple sentences of what you said, and then what does the speaker do? The speaker repeats what they just said, right?
Yeah, good start.
Yeah, that's not a good start.
Yeah, you guys were talking when I was scheduled to start, and you didn't. And they're not not everybody's looking at their watch. The speaker ought to be, though. Yeah. Look, movement during the first few seconds, and even movement before you start, assuming you're starting on time, is inherently a detractor. And if you're moving around when you start, you are setting an example which says, this is what I normally do, move around. You're not then setting off your presentation as being, this is the presentation and I'm presenting to you now. If you're moving around before on the stage, if there's a stage, and then you start talking and you're still moving around, it looks as if you're doing the same thing you were 5 minutes before. You don't want that. You want this to be boxed in. I'm presenting now. I wasn't presenting before. I'm presenting now, and you're getting my best. Yeah. Rather than, I'm just continuing what I was doing before, which was getting ready. Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. And they think, I'm so comfortable. I'm just walking around and I would start talking. It's like, I was in my living room and suddenly I'm on Air Force One. It just doesn't work that way. There needs to be a moment where the audience comes together in expectancy with the person in front of the audience, the presenter. You stand still for a moment, and then you've said everything that was before is before, and now we're starting. And the energy that I'm about to show you in this room is a function of the points I'm trying to make rather than my natural ambient energy state.
There you go.
Yeah.
So you start standing still, right?
Yeah.
But after that, you're going to use the whole space. Now you can move.
Yeah. Now, we're not suggesting you're a ping pong ball and you go anywhere, but if you have the space, we recommend you use it. And it's amazing to me the amount of space people have, and then they get welded to a podium, and that's why we don't recommend podiums. Right. And look, guys, don't get me wrong. There are times and places for podiums, no question about it, particularly if there are going to be multiple people on a stage at the same time, or there needs to be an MC or concierge, all those kind of things. But I have to tell you, if you stand in too small a box and everyone in the room essentially is having the same experience audio-wise relative to your voice, if your voice is always the same distance away, and many people have trouble modulating their voice up and down, it begins to bore people. There's not enough distinction in points you're making. There's not enough variation. There's not enough diversity in the tools that you're using. And if there's a chance you're going to lose somebody, standing in one place and having your voice always come from the same place takes away from your message. If you are standing in different spots, close to them, far away from them, left of them, right of them, behind them, the more different places you stand, and ideally, strategically, depending upon, we'll talk more about that in a minute, the more likely you are to get more of your points across to more people, which is the whole point of communicating into a group anywhere. Okay? Great presenters move from side to side, although there are dangers there. They use the whole width of the room. They move back and forth. They move towards the audience at times. They also move toward their visual aids at times, although please, and we'll talk more about integrating visual aids later, but I'm still amazed that people, I see presenters all the time turning their back on the audience. Yeah. They change the slide and they turn and look at their slide. Dude, really? You don't know? How many slides do we have at our conferences? 40? As if I have to turn around and know and I have to check what slide I've got behind me?
Yeah.
It's like, the presentation is on the screen and not in me. Guys, never make that mistake. The presentation is never slides. It's always you. Look, think of it this way. Let me make it really clear. Scout out, and we'll talk more about this in practicing, where you're going to make the point you're going to make, when you're going to make it. Unless you're just stringing together sentences randomly and none of them are any more valuable than the other ones, what you do is you make one point and then you move to a different space to make a different point. Use one side of the room to give one example and then the other side of the room to give another. Now, I'm not saying you ping pong back and forth.
It's purposeful moving.
Exactly.
It's just random ping ponging back and forth.
Well, you're not trying to lasso the audience and just walking around them and making points whenever you want. You think about it a little bit. For instance, if I'm on a slide and the third bullet on the slide is the big bullet, I'm making this up. I don't think about bullets very often. But if the third bullet is the big one, I'm going to ask myself, where in the room am I going to be during that bullet? And I'll tell you, sometimes if it's the most important bullet, I'm going to be at the power position. And I'm going to have pause for a moment, and they're going to remember that expectancy that they had at the beginning of the day. Mm-hmm. Why you wouldn't ever go back to that spot, or as somebody once said to me, well, I can't go back to that spot, Mark, because the projector's on. I said, well, turn it off for a second. Turn this projector off, stand right in front of the projector, be in the power position for a moment, if in fact you're between the projector and the screen, and stand there for a moment and pause even infinitesimally and be in that power position, and it'll remind them of that expected moment at the start of the presentation.
Something important is ready to happen.
Is ready to happen. And then when you say it, and if you're the only event occurring, the words coming out of your mouth are the only thing that's happening in a total quiet room, they'll never forget that sentence you're about to make. Okay?
Make it memorable, too. Make it a good sentence.
Yeah. Well, look, move towards the screen when you want to point at something to demonstrate your point. Don't turn and look at the screen in order to make sure you're going to get the next point right. Move towards a questioner when they ask a question. We have a podcast specifically about answering questions in a presentation. It's one of my favorites. I'm not sure it's in the Hall of Fame just because we don't want to have 200 casts. I don't think it's right to have 200 casts in the Hall of Fame. But you approach a questioner, you accept the question, we call it the medicine ball technique, and then you move away from them to include the whole audience in your answer. And then, depending upon the questioner, you're away from them, but you look back at them to make sure to finish the answer with them, but now you're naturally transitioning to talk to the entire audience. Now, all this sounds natural. And folks, we do make these movements naturally if we're in a conversation with 2 or 3 people. We do. We maybe only make very small movements with our feet, but if you'll begin to notice, people do turn their shoulders. They do turn their feet. Their toes point in different direction, depending upon how many people are in a group with them. If you want to make a point to just one, you turn your shoulders toward him. If you want to make it toward both, you open up your hands a little bit and make sure that both people know that you're trying to address them both. Okay? If you stand up when you're on the phone, you're going to find yourself moving each time you make a point. We've said this before. People who are born blind gesture when they speak. Okay? The reason for that is the part of the brain that controls speech also is closely related to the part that controls gestures. Human beings communicate with their hands as well as their speech. And again, just to be clear, I've said it a million times before, I'll say it again. Italians don't gesture more. Americans don't gesture more. Russians don't gesture more. Zimbabweans don't gesture more. We all gesture relatively equally based on nationality. The differences tend to be in terms of your natural style, whether you tend to be assertive or reserved and so on, and whether your people are task focused. We can have an hour-long discussion about disc and gestures, but we're not going to do that today, obviously. All this is when you're talking to 100 people or 30 people or 40 people, we're suggesting you make clear the movements you wish to make. And this cast really just talks about the parameters and some suggestions. If I were coaching somebody individually, I'd say, okay, let's go through your presentation. What are the 4 or 5 key points? Where are they? And of course, it always worries me when they say, well, I just really want to present this stuff. No, you're failing. Okay, you need to go. Leave me alone right now. I'm going to punch you in the face. But okay, where are the moments? And who's going to be in the room? And do we know where they sit? Right. And get more strategic. And I'll touch on that more in a little bit. When you're in a bigger room with more people, you have to do what comes naturally to you, only bigger. Okay? Now, for you high S's and you high C's, and your movements tend to be smaller, naturally, you make smaller gestures, less expansive gestures, you might say. You're going to feel like you're exaggerating the movements you're making.
Yeah, but to the audience, to the audience, they can't even see the difference.
Exactly, and you're going to feel uncomfortable. And sometimes when S's and C's, when we ask them to emote a little bit more, actually gesture in a way that shows their emotions more, and they're uncomfortable about it, I make a point of showing them, I ask them to cross their arms. And if you're driving, don't do this, but anywhere else, if you're just listening and your arms are free, cross your arms right now, and then look down at your arms and notice where your right hand and your left hand are. Is your right hand underneath your left bicep or vice versa? Is your left hand above your right bicep or below it? So on. Look down. Figure out where your hands are. Now uncross your arms and recross them. And whatever arm was in front or away from your body before, put the other arm away from your body and put your other hand underneath and so on. It will feel very awkward to you because you've developed a habit about the way you cross your arms. It's a gesture. But anyone else will never be able to tell. Even your best friend will not be able to tell that you've changed the way you've crossed your arms. By the same token, if you're in front of an audience, and I know this cast isn't about gestures, but the point is, you're going to have to gesture bigger. You're going to have to move bigger. And even though it's awkward, the answer is it's not about you. It's about the audience. The audience wants you to gesture more and to move more because you're talking to more people. Okay. And that then really gets us into practice. I mean, the whole issue of discomfort, in my experience in coaching hundreds, maybe even thousands by now, even up to presidents, I routinely say, no, you got to practice, you got to practice, you got to practice.
Makes a huge difference.
Yeah. For some reason today, folks, I just have to tell you, what most of you are thinking of as practice is rehearsing your speech in your head on the way to work, on the way home. You're looking at your notes.
Yeah, that's not practice.
It's not practice. Practice is in the room without notes, having done all that other work before, with your visual aids, and ideally having people in the room, a friend of yours, or if not, no one, and over and over and over going over it.
Doing it just like you would when you actually present the presentation.
Guys, the best way to get good at moving around a room, and the only way to become great at it, is to practice. Well, we said it before, right? The whole point about there are maybe several points that are really critical in a presentation. Sometimes it's the recommendation line. I recommend you do this, or will we do A or B? Right? A question. Sometimes it's making a clear connection, making clear a connection, but that is a key to supporting our key point. Sometimes it's refuting a common idea that keeps the audience from being able to grasp your idea. Whatever it is, for those moments, we recommend you not only know the exact words you're going to say, I mean exact words and the cadence, and you practice them, and maybe nothing else in your presentation is memorized, but those words are. And for those moments, we also recommend you memorize where you're going to be, and for that matter, therefore, where you were right before, how long you're going to stay there to make your point, and how quickly you ended up moving there. Now, some people are going, oh my gosh, it just got more complex. Yeah, it did. It did. It absolutely did. And if you practice 3 or 4 or 5 times, you'll have it. And what did we say at the start? In the land of the blind, the one-eyed person rules, right? You don't have to be fabulous at this stuff. But if you're a manager now or an individual contributor and you're listening to this and you want to get better and you're not willing to upgrade your presentation skills, and the only way you can upgrade your presentation skills is to present, and the only way to really get good and great is to practice, I'm just amazed that people are like, well, I'm kind of am who I am, and I hope as I get more comfortable, things will be better. This is, no.
Well, that's the mistake people make. They see a great presenter. They see you present, for example, and you're a great presenter. They see you, they see you and say, oh, he's just naturally a great presenter. And they don't know that for the Effective Management Conference or the Effective Communication Conference, you have practiced it over and over hundreds of times. Folks,
when did
hundreds of times.
I promise Gerhard Gross down in Mexico City that we would do the Effective Interviewing Conference? I think I promised it in late 2011. We didn't present until summer of 2012.
Yeah.
And somebody in the firm started pestering me about, well, what's the agenda? Well, I'm working on it. I'm standing in my living room talking to the walls and trying to figure out what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. I'm trying to integrate all this stuff. And it's hard. Now, this is a presentation that tens of thousands of people are going to see, and hundreds of other people are going to use it over the course of the next 100 years, the Effective Interviewing Conference. But that's how you do it. The Effective Manager Conference. I mean, when we just watched Danny present a little while, and over and over and over again, people say, well, I think you ought to do this or I ought to do that. And I think through and I go, no, I know that won't work. And I'll tell you exactly why. Because I've blocked that out and I know exactly where you need to be. In fact, the action of figuring out where you want to be is called blocking in the theater. Look, if the VP of operations always sits toward the back of a room in a particular spot, be back there when you make the key point that he loves about your recommendation. And how would you know that? Of course,
you pre-wired, right?
Pre-wired.
Yeah, of course.
Duh. Hey, I really like this. Okay, make sure you don't have to stand right next to him, But if you're standing near him and other people are looking at you and he's now in their line of vision and he's nodding his head vigorously and he's VP, why wouldn't you? If he's sitting in the back of the room and you make the presentation and the people in the front don't look over their shoulder to see him in the back.
And see him nodding?
Yeah, exactly. Dumb, right? And again, when you finish, we recommend you're in front of the audience, very close to, if not in the power position. And rehearse the words you're going to end your presentation with there. And say those words there. Absolutely.
Yeah. The example you just gave was an example of moving into the audience, and that's an opportunity that a lot of presenters miss.
Yeah, if your presentation lasts for more than 20 minutes, we think of that as being mid to long, okay? And generally speaking, if you're in a small room and you're presenting if you're on your feet for 30 minutes or more, that's a long presentation for most people. Now, somebody might say, well, an 8-hour presentation is long. Yeah, no, that's super, super, super long. Simply because if you graph them, if you did a histogram, the number of presentations that are 0 to 15 and 15 to 30 is way outweighs the number that are 8 hours long, right? But if you do that, if it's mid to long, okay, and you stay only in the front of the room, what ends up happening is it's begin to be perceived that you are in one part of the room and everybody else is in another part of the room. You're moving, trying to inject energy and trying to make key points and trying to emphasize certain things, but you're doing it as if you're on an island and everybody else is on the continent, on the main, right? So we recommend you move into the audience. And if you're only moving side to side, that actually can become boring to the audience. And if you get a little bit repetitive, we'll talk about that in a second in terms of pacing, it can come across in a way that's boring to the audience. So you move into the audience. If there's a center aisle, you have to move down it at least halfway one time or more in a 30-minute presentation. Okay? The single biggest way we know to engage or re-engage the back of a room, if you're speaking to 30 or to 50 people, is to move towards them into the audience. And by the way, you can also do this down the side of an audience, although it doesn't feel as much like you're in the audience. It depends on the room you're in. But if there's a center aisle, and we generally like center aisles if you're presenting to more than 10, 15, 20 people, then being able to move into the center is good.
That's why you want to pay attention to your physical surroundings, right? And if the tables are arranged such, say classroom style without a center aisle, that you cannot move into the audience, then move them apart.
Yeah, exactly.
Make a center aisle.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Even if it means losing an aisle down one side or the other, people don't mind. Yeah. And that brings us to the last point about pacing, right? The classic mistake of people who just start moving around, they're just beginning to get comfortable and they feel like they know their topic. Most speakers who think of themselves as good and aren't, in other words, I'm pretty good, I'm pretty comfortable, think that pacing back and forth shows naturalness. But it doesn't. You think it does because it's as if you're musing out loud, but that's not the way it appears to the audience. And look, you can be great behind a podium too. The worst one is pacing while looking down. This is supposed to show to people, again, that you're so comfortable you can just think out loud, you're sharing your thoughts, you're musing in front of the audience because you're so smart about this stuff. It's as if they're in a meeting in a one-on-one in their office and they're just pacing back and forth and throwing ideas around. But they're wrong, guys. They're wrong. Pacing isn't worse than being behind a podium, but it's not much better, right? Being out from behind the podium is good, but then pacing back and forth puts you very close to being behind. Pacing is boring. Let me be more precise. Pacing bores the audience at a physical level. And the whole point of movement is to avoid boring. It's to add emphasis where you want to add emphasis. It's almost as if somebody said, move around, and so you did, with the least creativity, without considering the reason for your movement to begin with. And look, why bother doing it if you don't achieve the objective that you set out to do?
Yeah, it's wandering versus purposeful.
Yeah.
Right.
And so, guys, when you rehearse, I'll tell you, when you rehearse, tape yourself.
It is so much easier today than it was
10 years ago?
10 years,
or 5
years ago.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
It's just your phone, right?
It's your phone.
Boom, done. Ask somebody to watch. And one of the things to look for is pacing. Seriously. And I did really good. I only talked for 30 minutes on this, I think.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and we only.
That's
I could. I
surprising.
mean, I struggled. I was like, I wanted to tell stories and all kinds of stuff, but I didn't because I wanted to get it all out there. And probably, folks, we're going to come back to this. We're going to dig deeper on this one. We'll probably do a master series on presenting, and we'll probably, I think in that case, we'll probably have some video, right? Show be here, not here, and so on. I don't know how we'll deliver that, but we'll figure it out. And this is just the basics. It's to get you thinking about moving and starting to move, and there are a few things you can do immediately. Clear the way, get rid of stuff that's going to be in your way. Make sure you stand still when you're starting. Use that whole space. Practice, move into the audience, but don't pace. You do this stuff, and again, land of the blind, one-eyed person is rules, right? And practice, 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 practice. Toastmasters would help for many of you.
Yes, very
right?
much.
And sometimes they use a podium, but many times they don't. And the more you move and the more you're thinking about moving, but you got to think about it in advance and practice it, the better off you're going to be. And if you want to be great, there's no way to be great without hard work, without practice, period.
Yeah. And don't complain if it's harder. It's harder to be better at something. That's just the way
Never
it is.
confuse an easy life with a good life, folks.
There you go. Thanks, my friend.
You bet, partner.
Bye. Thanks, everyone. That's it. We'll see you next week. In the meantime, have a great one. So long.